Graham Rourke came home to our house in San Diego holding apology flowers in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. The flowers were white, expensive, and too clean for a man who had spent weeks letting another woman rename what he had done. He expected me near the kitchen island, tired enough to listen and polite enough to let him call his absence complicated. What he found instead was Dottie Ames in her coat, purse zipped, my keys on the counter, and the front hall sounding like a place I no longer lived. Dottie had worked in enough California homes to know polished apologies usually arrived before honest ones, so she did not rise when he stepped inside. She looked at the bouquet first, then at his face, and said, "Marin left before you came back. Graham, this time, you are not late by a few hours." He laughed softly, the way he did whenever a room stopped bending toward him, and asked where I had gone as if the answer still belonged to him. Dottie nodded toward the dining room and said, "She left what you need on the table, and she asked me to lock the door behind me." I was not upstairs, not in the guest room, and not outside, waiting for courage to become motion. I was 3 exits north, in a furnished rental with my phone off, my wedding ring in a drawer, and Rowan Bell's number beside untouched coffee. I had moved only what was mine, left every argument where Graham had last seen it, and changed only what I was allowed to change. That was the first clean thing I had done for myself. On the dining room table, the envelope waited without his name. My name, or one sentence to make the paper kinder. Graham carried the flowers into that room because men like him still believe beauty can negotiate with proof. Dottie told me he set the velvet box beside the envelope like it might help. The top page held one line in my handwriting: "I have heard enough to stop being available for your version." Lila Hartman came to the house with a linen gift bag, loose-leaf tea, and the careful face of a woman who had not arrived to apologize. She stood on my front steps in cream trousers and a soft gold necklace, looking less like a mistress than a consultant delivering bad news. I let her in because I wanted to see how much of Graham's story had been written in her voice. She looked around my kitchen, then offered the tea and said she hoped we could speak like 2 mature women. I made coffee instead, because tea felt like something she had chosen for the performance, and I was done accepting props. Lila sat across from me with hands folded around her phone, explaining that Graham had been unhappy and nobody wanted this to become ugly. I opened my vendor notebook, clicked a pen, and asked when she had started helping him decide what ugly meant. Her mouth tightened, then recovered, and she said Graham only wanted a clean ending, one that would not punish him for being honest. That was the first time I understood she had not simply walked into my marriage. She had edited it, polished it, and helped him rehearse the version where I became the cold wife he had survived. She mentioned an email he planned to send to clients, something private and respectful, though every word protected him first. When I asked if she had written it, Lila gave me a smile and said, "I helped him find language that felt fair." I looked down at my notebook and wrote exactly that, because people tell the truth fastest when they think you are only taking notes. Then she made the mistake that ended her softness. She said Graham could not keep building a healing brand while trapped beside a woman who turned every dinner into a receipt. I felt something inside me go still, not because the insult landed, but because it showed me the shape of their plan. "So you do not love him," I said, closing the notebook while her smile thinned. "You are just revising him for market." I did not break into Graham's life. I did not guess his passwords, follow his car, or touch his phone while he slept. The first folder began with things he had left in front of me. The kind of ordinary paper trail a careless man mistakes for background noise. Retreat pages were still public. Vendor confirmations still landed in our shared inbox. And the credit card I was authorized to view still told the truth in merchant names he never bothered to soften. My work had trained me to read risk before it became a lawsuit, so I treated my own marriage like a property claim nobody wanted filed. I matched retreat dates to photos guests had tagged. then matched those photos to linen rentals, car services, spa blocks, and one dinner reservation that listed 2 dietary notes instead of 1. I did not need a confession from Graham after Lila sat at my kitchen table and talked about a clean ending. Her phrase sat beside the email subject line he had forwarded by mistake, and suddenly their softness had a skeleton. By the 3rd night, the timeline stopped looking like suspicion and started looking like procedure. I wrote short notes under each document. Not emotional ones, only the kind a lawyer could read without asking me to calm down. Graham had used our home calendar, shared cards, client events, and vendor relationships like nobody would ever place them side by side. When I finally did, the pattern was not hidden at all, only scattered across the life he assumed I was too tired to audit. Rowan Bell took my call before breakfast, her voice steady enough that I stopped apologizing for how much I was sending. She read while I sat on the kitchen floor with my laptop open, watching the progress bar move like a pulse. Then she told me not to text him, not to post, not to warn Lila, and not to confuse anger with leverage. In California, once the papers were served correctly, she could move to keep him from shifting money or rewriting the marital story through panic. "Marin, this is enough to begin," she said, and I closed my eyes because beginning was no longer the same thing as surviving. Graham left for Palm Springs with a suitcase, a linen blazer, and the calm voice of a man who believed he was choosing the hour of his own exit. He called it a retreat, the final client weekend before we sat down like adults and made peace with what had changed. I let him say it, because by then every soft word he used had already been placed beside a date, a charge, and Lila's careful language. He thought he was leaving me inside our house with uncertainty, but I was already moving through it with tape, boxes, and a list Rowan Bell had told me not to improvise. Dottie arrived before noon with her old canvas tote and the kind of silence that does not ask a woman to explain why she is shaking. We packed only what was mine. The clothes I had bought, the documents with my name, the framed photographs that did not require a debate. Graham's shoes stayed in the closet, his books stayed on the shelves, and his favorite whiskey stayed on the bar where he had left it. I wanted nothing he could later call theft, confusion, or damage, because men like Graham survive by turning a woman's escape into evidence against her. Rowan handled the papers from Los Angeles, and every instruction she gave me sounded boring enough to be powerful. Do not threaten him. Do not warn Lila. Do not take anything that creates a side argument, and do not answer if he senses the door closing. I opened a new mailing address, moved my personal records, changed what I was legally allowed to change, and left the house clean enough that even his anger would have no place to sit. By sunset, my life fit inside a rented SUV, while his version of our marriage was still waiting for him in Palm Springs. The last call came while I was standing in the empty bedroom, looking at the pale square on the wall where our wedding photo had hung. Graham's voice arrived smooth and tired, telling me he wanted us to have a kind ending, not one filled with resentment. I asked, "The ending you wrote with Lila, or the one you were planning to give me after I signed it?" For 1 second, he did not breathe, and that pause told me the name had landed exactly where it was supposed to. Graham did not open the envelope right away. Dottie told me later he stood over it with the flowers in his hand, staring at the cream paper as if my handwriting might rearrange itself into mercy. The velvet box sat beside it, small and useless, the kind of gift a man buys when he mistakes damage for timing. When he pulled the flap loose, there was no screaming inside, no photograph meant to shame him, and no sentence asking him to understand what he had broken. The first page was a clean timeline, arranged exactly the way Rowan Bell had told me to build it. Retreat names, vendor confirmations, disputed charges, and the draft language Graham thought would make him look gentle all sat in plain black ink. I had not underlined anything in red, because red would let him call it anger before he had to call it evidence. Black ink did not beg, and every page knew what it proved. Then came the line that turned his apology into something smaller. In the email chain Graham had forwarded through our shared account, the bottom half carried Lila's edits, telling him not to use the word affair. She had written that he should say we had been living separately in spirit for a long time, because people understood growth better than betrayal. He answered with a thumbs up and asked if that sounded too harsh on me. He called my old number until it stopped ringing, then called Dottie, then Lila. Dottie let it go unanswered from a grocery store parking lot, waiting until she could text me what happened without one unnecessary word. Lila picked up, and according to what Graham later admitted, her first question was not whether I was safe or whether anything could still be repaired. It was, "How much has she seen?" Graham looked at the papers, the flowers, the box, and the empty chair across from him. "Enough," he told her, and that single word did more damage between them than anything I could have shouted. Before he could decide which lie to save first, Beckett Shaw's email landed, pausing the retreat contract over compliance concerns tied to services Graham had billed through his agency. The first door closed quietly while Graham still held flowers for a wife who had already left. Lila did not disappear after Beckett paused Graham's contract. She moved the way people move when their public language has always been cleaner than their private choices, sending one careful email through an address I had never seen before. She wrote that women should not destroy each other over a painful transition, and that she hoped I would not turn a private ending into a public injury. I read it once, then forwarded it to Rowan Bell, because by then I understood Lila was not asking for peace. She was asking to keep authorship. Rowan's reply went out before lunch, calm enough to make every sentence feel locked. It instructed Lila to preserve every email, invoice, draft statement, text message, client note, and communication involving Graham, his agency, and the language prepared around our separation. There was no insult in it, no threat dressed up as bravery, only the kind of legal wording that makes a confident woman suddenly reread her sent folder. Lila had wanted me emotional because emotion would make me easier to frame, but Rowan gave her paper instead. The fallout did not arrive like a public scandal, and that made it harder for her to fight. One wellness studio removed Lila's name from an upcoming workshop page. Then a podcast delayed the release of her interview on ethical storytelling. A client asked her not to use their logo in her portfolio until the matter was clarified, and Beckett Shaw's email moved through that industry's side doors faster than any post could have. Nobody called her names where I could see it. They simply stopped letting her borrow their credibility. Near dusk, she left one voicemail, and her voice had lost the softness she wore in my kitchen. "You are making me look like a liar, Marin," she said, as if I had written the email chain, billed the wrong services, and taught Graham which words would clean him. I played it once for Rowan, then looked at the preserved drafts on my screen and said, "No." She did that in writing. Lila had built her living, shaping stories for other people, but she forgot language leaves fingerprints when it is used to cover a mess. By the time Graham walked into mediation, his softness had become the last suit he owned. He wore an open collar, tired eyes, and that careful humility men save for rooms where witnesses are present. I sat beside Rowan Bell around a paper cup of coffee I never drank. Graham looked at me first, then at the mediator, and offered the sentence he had practiced, "I never wanted to hurt you." Rowan did not move, which was why I had hired her. She opened the folder and placed the timeline between us, plain enough to make his voice feel decorated. Retreat dates, vendor confirmations, Lila's edits, disputed agency charges, Beckett Shaw's paused contract, and the preservation letters sat in order. When Graham tried to say I was turning a sad marriage into a legal performance, the mediator looked down and asked, "Are you disputing the authenticity of these documents?" That was the first time his voice failed in front of someone who mattered. He touched the table, then pulled his hand back as if even the wood had become part of the record. He said context mattered, that private pain could look misleading on paper, and that Lila had only helped him communicate with care. Rowan turned one page and read the line where Lila told him not to use the word affair, and the room stopped giving him anywhere soft to land. I did not raise my voice, because there was nothing left to lift. I looked at the man who had once practiced tenderness well enough to make me doubt my own discomfort. "I do not want you destroyed," I said, while his attorney stared at the folder. "I want you to stop using my calm as the place where you hide what you did." The settlement came together because Graham had run out of useful denial. He accepted responsibility for the disputed charges, agreed not to use a false version of our marriage in any public or commercial story, and signed terms that let the house be sold without another performance. There was no collapse, no confession, no final speech from the man who lived on speeches. He left with his image smaller than when he entered. And for Graham Rourke, that was the punishment he understood. I did not keep the San Diego house. For a while, I thought I would want it because Graham had lost the right to walk through it like nothing had happened. Then I stood in the dining room after the sale papers were signed, saw the pale rectangle where the envelope had waited, and understood ownership was not the same as peace. I sold it clean, took what the settlement gave me, and left the coast with my name still attached to myself. Santa Barbara did not save me. It simply gave me a bungalow with old tile, a porch that faced morning light, and neighbors who only knew me as Marin Whitlock, not Graham Rourke's wife. Dottie came monthly with grocery bags and opinions, and Rowan Bell stayed my lawyer long enough to become the friend who could tell me when I was confusing caution with wisdom. My new work began small, helping women read contracts before they signed away leverage. And every client reminded me that survival can become a skill without turning into bitterness. Graham's agency never fully recovered its shine. He still worked, because men like him usually find another room before they find accountability. But the doors that mattered opened slower after Beckett Shaw's email traveled through the industry. Lila rebranded under softer colors and cleaner words. Yet the clients who had seen the preserved drafts no longer let her teach them ethical storytelling. Nobody had to ruin them in public. Their own sentences had done enough in private. The first contract for my new practice arrived on a Thursday, folded inside an envelope with my business name printed correctly across front. I stood on the porch holding it while Dottie called from the kitchen. "Coffee is getting cold." And for the first time in months, I smiled without checking who was watching. Graham once came home with flowers and found a door closing behind me, but I opened a new one without asking anyone to clap. If this story stayed with you, thank you for listening until the end, especially if some part of it felt close to a life you once had to outgrow. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more stories. And remember, a quiet life can still be the strongest answer.